likelihood that Jeremy Corbyn's position is going to switch back to being anti-EU?
Yeah, please.
I think you're a perfect exemplar for the EU, because you're in a position where no one voted for you, and you're in a place where you're paid a lot of money and no one can get rid of you. And I think most of what I've heard tonight is absolute undemocratic drivel, as far as I'm concerned. And if you think people will not complain, we're very slow to anger in this country. If you think people will not complain about a second referendum, then the Gilets jaunes in Paris is going to be like a tea party, because people are absolutely, well, you may all think that, you may all think that, but it was a democratic vote people had, and that vote, the problem is, in Parliament, it's 75% Remain. And Remain want to sabotage Brexit. The people have voted for it, and people
voted for it. Everybody else didn't.
Okay, so they didn't. They didn't bother vote. Oh, does that mean that they're Remainers then? Of course it doesn't. Of course it does. Yeah, they're not Leavers and they're not Remainers. The majority voted for Brexit, and Brexit should. There were no. What lies? What lies? It's that, and I've tried to argue this point with you on Twitter, and you blocked me. It was a perfectly polite request to you on Twitter, and you blocked me for it. That you weren't prepared to debate on Twitter. You just blocked me.
Well, shall I deal with the point now?
Yes, yes, please, yes.
The people cannot betray the people. If the reason why we did the referendum to resolve this is precisely in response to your point, that otherwise, if the political elite just sort this out in London and don't give the people the decisive say...
What did the people vote for?
Well, that is precisely the reason, sir, why in my judgment, we all have to make a judgment in Parliament. The right thing is a referendum.
Sorry, it's quite simple. Yes or no, in or out. The majority voted out.
Would you like me to reply? You said, would you like me to reply?
But you're not making any sense.
What did people vote on? What did people vote on 3 years ago? An option which said leave the European Union. There wasn't actually a proposal behind it. There was no deal. Which is the reason why Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is in the House of Commons, and I accept I'm in the House of Lords, but people in the House of Commons are taking a similar view too, who have been elected. When you said it's undemocratic what's happening, and you said that Remain dominated, the institution you're saying that Remain dominated is the House of Commons, which is elected. Now what Jacob said, because I debate this with him, when Jacob was seeking to persuade David Cameron to go for a referendum 5 years ago, he called for what he called the dual referendum, which he said was the democratic way of doing it. And the dual referendum was a first referendum on the principle of having negotiations to leave, to see what deal you would get, and then a second referendum with those terms put to the British people. Because otherwise, democratically, how can people know that what's on offer is better than the status quo?
So were you expecting a second referendum if you'd won?
Well, if we'd won, then there would have been no deal to put the British people there, because we would have stayed. So that wasn't an issue.
Right.
The reason,
Yeah.
trying to answer.
Sorry.
The reason why this democratic referendum is precisely because leaving the European Union requires something to replace it. Whereas if you're staying, by definition, you don't need something to replace staying, because you're simply staying. Now, the reason why Cameron didn't do it, which is an interesting one, is because he didn't, and this is where your point is completely valid, Cameron did not contemplate the possibility of losing the referendum. The big, colossal mistake he made was to make no preparations whatsoever for what would happen if the British people did vote for that first phase, which was the process of starting to leave the European Union. Indeed, you remember he said that he would stay and see it, and then the first thing he did was to resign because he hadn't got a clue what to do. And the democratic argument for the second referendum is that somehow, as a country, we have to resolve this question. If we are going to leave, what are the terms going to be? Do we like the terms? And is our mature judgment that those terms, which obviously you couldn't know 3 years ago because there'd been no negotiations, are better than the status quo? Now, there are 2 ways you could resolve that question, because it has to be resolved. Either Parliament alone votes for it. Now, that is democratic, because we are a parliamentary democracy, the House of Commons is elected. It's not my chamber, by the way, which is taking these decisions, because they're fundamental issues to do with the future of the country. It's only the House of Commons that takes them. I'm here giving you my views. But it's the House of Commons, the elected House, which is taking all these key decisions. It would be perfectly democratic and in accord with our democratic constitution for the House of Commons alone to take that decision. If the House of Commons did take that decision alone, it looks to me, on the alignment in the House of Commons, that they would continue to do it, and we would end up staying in the EU, and that would be the democratic decision of the Commons. However, it's precisely because we did have the referendum 3 years ago that the conviction is there, which most MPs shared. If we are going to give the people the option, having seen the terms, to stay, then the right thing to do is to put it to a referendum. Now, on this fundamental question, is it undemocratic to hold another referendum? David Davis, a democracy that cannot change its mind is not a democracy. It is emphatically not undemocratic for the British people to express a view on an issue which is of massive concern to them at any given moment. And they do it periodically. It's the reason why we have general elections every 3, 4, 5 years. We don't just have one general election, which determines the whole...
How often do we have referendums then?
Well, we would have then had, let's be clear, we would have had...
We don't have those every 5 years.
We'll have had 2 on this issue, because Parliament decided it was the right thing to do. 2 in 3 years. That will be fewer referendums in 3 years than we've had general elections in this country. So you cannot make an argument that it is undemocratic. Is it the case that some people like you, who voted to leave 3 years ago, would much rather we didn't? Well, I take it from what you said, you would much rather we didn't. That's a point of view, but it's not an argument about democracy. It's a desire in that referendum that we should continue to leave. You will have exactly the same right to express that view and to vote for it in a referendum as you did in the last referendum. What people who voted 3 years ago cannot reasonably do is to have an open-ended veto on any subsequent decisions which are taken in respect of the negotiations or the judgment that should be made on the treaty. But just to conclude this point, because it's quite important, I debate with leaders all the time, and including on Twitter. The only people I ever block on Twitter are people who make abusive or rude remarks. So
well, I didn't.
What was it you said? But if that would be the only reason why I blocked it. But the people who voted, who campaigned to leave 3 years ago, because how people voted is very hard to know precisely what the motivation was. The people who campaigned to leave 3 years ago have now split. That's why we're in this crisis. There are some who are supporting Theresa May and want her deal, but there are lots, and I don't know which side of this you're on, who actually think Theresa May's deal is terrible.
It is terrible.
And they want this thing called clean Brexit. And indeed,
No, just Brexit. Not clean, not hard, not soft, just Brexit.
Well, you're sort of making my argument for me. You actually, this split that there is amongst those people who leave. Now, Nigel Farage said to me when I was in his studio a while back that Theresa May's deal was worse than staying in the EU. Worse. So I said I look forward to campaigning alongside you. But that only goes to make the argument that 3 years ago there was not a single clear proposition for leave. Because if there had been a single clear proposition for leave, we wouldn't be having this argument. We would know what the financial deal was going to be. We would know what's happening to the Northern Ireland border. We would know what's happening to our immigration policy. We would know what's happening to our customs and our trade. The fact that we didn't know any of those things 3 years ago is because there had been no negotiations. As those negotiations have taken place, what's actually happened is that the people, I'm not making a remark about the British people as a whole, just the people who led the campaign for leave 3 years ago have split. One group now wants an extreme version of Brexit. Another group wants a pragmatic version of Brexit. That's what's happened. They can't agree. This is part of the reason why we're in this crisis. This has to be resolved. And there are only 2 democratic ways of resolving it. One is for Parliament to do it alone. The other is to put the issue to the British people. And on the point about what people think, the fact that we've got, 100, 150 people here on a Sunday evening, and I get meetings like this everywhere I go, and lots of other politicians do too, shows there is massive public interest and concern. The job of Parliament is to respond to public interest and concern. We are a parliamentary democracy, and if in the judgment of Parliament the right thing to do is then to put this issue to the British people in a referendum, then that is the supreme expression of the democracy in our country. We should be proud of it. We should take part in it. We should not make extremist claims about this undermining our institutions, when in fact this is the fulfilment of our democratic institutions.
Rubbish.
And then we do need to come together
Rubbish.
and then get on with it afterwards.
Yeah.
Rubbish. Rubbish.
But I'm very happy to take further.
Is it okay to ask one question though?
I would.
No, it's not going to be argumentative at all. We are going to go, if we go down the deal route, the deal's not going to satisfy you. Would you, if it came to it, because it is going to go to a deal, if it doesn't go to no Brexit, would the deal ever satisfy you, or are you never going to be satisfied? Because you're never going to get the clean or just Brexit or whatever you want to call it. You're never going to get the exit that is just walking out, no deals, no
Because we have too many Remain
No, it's not Remain, it's
MPs
just you-
who have reneged.
You've got to do a deal.
Hang on. Most MPs have reneged on their manifesto commitments.
Thank you very much. I think that's, we've heard a lot of